So welcome everyone to tonight's presentation, Counting Winter Bugs with John Acorn. John Acorn is an internationally renowned scientist, naturalist, author, and broadcaster, well known as the Nature Nut. I've personally learned a great deal from U of A professor John Acorn. Here at Nature Alberta, we are very fortunate to have John and his enthusiastic and whimsical approach to sharing his passion for nature on board as our patron. In 2011, John started a citizen science initiative to document bugs during our harsh Canadian winters. I'll admit that this initiative has changed the way I react to bugs in my home. Instead of grabbing the nearest item suited to whacking the bug, I panic searching for my phone to take a picture of the little creature and excitedly share it on iNaturalist. I end up walking away without even squishing the tiny little intruder, who is now the latest star on iNaturalist. I'm excited that John is joining us today to share his passion and insight into counting winter bugs. Welcome, John Acorn.
Thank you, Steph. That's great. What a nice introduction, and welcome, folks. Nice to see so many names in gray boxes. That's super. I do get a kick out of how good the attendance is at these online presentations. Well, I'm going to share my screen to start with here, and my plan here is to give you an overview of how this project has come together and how it's evolved over the years. And then once I finish with the slides that I've got, we'll go have a look at the iNaturalist project and see how it's doing. And the answer is it's doing pretty good. But let's just start with some background. And thanks, Steph, you're right. It was 2011, and the idea, I'll tell you the idea, it was a little bit what shall I say? A bit of a shenanigans, right? Because there was a prominent website, I don't think it exists anymore. If it does, I'm not aware of it, that would compile all of the bird species seen during December, January, and February in Alberta each year, and you know, it was kind of exciting. We have the Edmonton Nature Club does the same thing, but through its email listserv. Anyway, the Alberta, does that still exist? Anybody know? Put it in the chat if you know anything about the status of that. The Alberta Winter Bird List would often get, you know, about, I don't know, 120, 140 species would be a particularly good year. And some of us thought, geez, I wonder how we would do if we counted bugs. So we started in 2011, and it was rather peculiarly organized at the beginning. Some people sent in reports through email. There were various Facebook pages where people would submit reports. And when I say email, I mean, you know, the list servers for various nature clubs, the so-called member clubs of Nature Alberta, and Facebook pages like Alberta Bugs and Insects, Alberta Spider Identification, and so on and so forth. We even set up a Facebook page for winter bug counting, which is not as good as iNaturalist, so we don't really favor it anymore. And sure enough, you know, quite quickly we realized that we could equal the number of species that the birders were finding. And you know, it's especially fun for somebody like me because I do the birds too. We were getting about the same number. So it was fun. It was tremendously fun. And that's, you know, that was the initial motive. There was no, you know, in the sense of real science, there was no deep hypothesis to be tested except, you know, can we beat the birders? But we started, well, let's try to, you know, formalize this a little bit. We'll use the same time period, December, January, and February. And that corresponds with what the birders use for their winter list, primarily because migration is basically not happening during those months. I mean, there's some movement of birds. There's, eruptive birds and finches and waxwings and things like that that are moving around during the winter months. But yeah, it seemed okay with us. That's winter, and it's really winter here. We I should also mention that we included Saskatchewan, so it's kind of an Alberta and Saskatchewan idea. Insects, arthropods of any sort, spiders, centipedes, found inside or out, and they have to be wild. They have to be there, on their own, so to speak, not reared or purchased. So you can't just go buy crickets at the pet store and count those, or count your pet tarantula and so on. Not terribly imposing rules, but they were rules. So let's start with what we expected to find. Now, outdoors on the snow on warm days, and I'm sure that most of you have encountered that there are bugs. I'm using bug as a synonym for arthropod here. There are bugs that we regularly encounter, or at least we thought we would regularly encounter, like these little snow fleas. Snow fleas are a type of springtail, and I've stolen this photograph from Nature Alberta with my thanks. Why have I used your photo? Because I didn't have a photo. We were kind of amazed that very few people were reporting these snow fleas, and that may be because they're much more easy to find after the end of February into March, and those kind of spring snowstorms is when the snow fleas come out on the snow. Do they love being out in the snow? Not really. They're soil creatures, and they get out on the snow kind of by accident. When it's warm and they're moving around, they'll jump out onto the snow. A lot of these bugs are actually active under the snow all winter, in that subnivean habitat where the snow serves as an insulating blanket, and it's just warm enough for them to be active underneath. Here's another classic snow bug, the wingless snow crane fly. Now, you probably know crane flies as big, sort of mosquito-ish flies that you see during the summer months, but this one, because it's active on snow and on the ground and in the colder times of the year, well, it doesn't have any wings. Having wings is a really bad idea if you're active in the middle of winter, because it's a lot colder above the snow. The higher you get up into the air, the colder it gets. And it's a good way to get in trouble. So there you go, a very peculiar looking thing. This is a male, and it has those big claspers at the back end. And you can see the two little, is my cursor showing here? Those two little dumbbell looking things, those are the remains, the evolutionary remains of the hind wings of any fly. They're the halteres. It's one of the few ways that you can tell this is in fact a fly. They're not as common as one might think, but on a warm day, we've had these pretty widespread across Alberta into Saskatchewan. Different, there's about half a dozen species here apparently. Very interesting bugs. Here's another classic winter bug. Again, wingless. You're seeing a pattern. The springtails didn't have any wings, neither did these others. This is a snow scorpion fly. Now, it's neither a scorpion nor a fly, but some of the relatives have it, and the abdomen curls around up over the back, and it looks a bit like a scorpion's sting. These things don't sting. They are very much like the other two. They wander out onto the snow on warm days in the winter, and much more commonly in the foothills and the Rockies. Although we have seen them in the river valley in Edmonton, and I imagine they're not very common in the prairies. I don't think we've ever had a prairie report. By the way, Steph, I'll I'll leave it to you if you want to monitor the chat in case there's anything urgent. If I try to split my attention, I'll get messed up for sure. Thanks. Now, those are the classic winter bugs on snow, but what you really find on snow, the most abundant things are spiders. And winter bug counting is a remarkable way to learn more about spiders. I've learned almost everything I know about spiders is because of the winter bug count. This is a wolf spider. At least I hope it's a wolf spider. And I have to admit, at first, I thought almost everything was a wolf spider. Wolf spiders have a particular arrangement of their eyes. They have very big eyes right at the front of their head. But this is one of the wolf spiders. And here's another wolf spider. You can see those two big eyes at the front of the head. They're not as big as the eyes of a jumping spider, and we'll come to those fairly soon. But it's really quite remarkable how many different species and genera of wolf spiders, the family Lycosidae, we are finding outside on the snow from time to time. And of course, there are different wolf spiders in different habitats. There are wolf spiders. I believe this is one of the wolf spiders that's most common around marshy areas. This one, I can't remember what it is. It might be one of the species that's common near rivers and so on, but I could be mistaken. Yeah, and if, by the way, if you like spiders, or if you're just curious about spiders, or if you think that it might be therapy for you and improve your appreciation of spiders, do check out that Alberta Spider Identification Facebook page. They do a very good job of not only identifying spider photographs, but also calming people down when they have excessive spider fears.
I do have a, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, that's fine, please.
Question here in the chat that Rocky's amazed and wondering where they might see the wolf spiders. Where in particular do they look to see them? Wolf spiders are they're very widespread, but I would say warm days, like above the freezing point on snow, especially near grassy areas, open areas, marshy areas. Some of them actually get into houses as well, but we'll get to the house bugs in a bit here. Yeah, a lot of the spiders you see are going to be wolf spiders. This crab spider, the eyes are a lot smaller. The body is a lot more compressed. The legs are more out to the side, and this is one of the spiders that again is active under the snow. Tucks away during the winter, but on warm days you'll see them come out. Beautiful little thing. If you are able to appreciate spider beauty, I think it took me a long time. There's a lot of people who are entomologically trained who actually have a gut reaction against spiders. There was a fascinating article about that about 10 years ago. And I was one of them. I had to work through the weird difference between 6 legs and 8. And now I think I respond more I can look at this and get a feeling of beauty, which is to me an achievement. And then there's this huge family of spiders, the sheet web weavers, the Linophiidae, and we find many, many different species out in the winter on snow. I think I found this one on a frozen spring, so on a big sheet of ice. Of course, they're going to be in leaf litter as well, but it's harder to find them in leaf litter. It's easier when they wander out into the snow. But look at how beautiful this is. I mean, that's got really nice colors, those yellow legs and the reddish cephalothorax, the black abdomen. This, by the way, is a male spider, and you can tell because these things that look like short legs at the front, those are called pedipalps, and they're big. They're kind of like big boxing gloves is the usual comparison.
And those are used to transfer sperm to the female during mating. So if you see a spider with big sort of boxing gloves up front, it's always going to be a male. Here's some, now this is an old photograph, a scan slide, but if you're out at a marshy place on a nice warm winter day, you might see one of these. This is actually a firefly, a member of the beetle family Lampyridae, but a firefly that has no light, an extremely disappointing firefly, but also a species that overwinters as an adult in marshy places. So you know, you're around a marsh on a warm day, you might see one of these walking around, and it is technically a firefly. The fireflies that glow are generally around in June, but there is this overwintering firefly that sometimes shows up near marshes. Everybody loves a woolly bear. The caterpillars of the tiger moth group of Lepidopterans, they typically have long hairs that discourage birds from eating them. The hairs apparently, you know, don't taste good or make your mouth itchy or whatever. I don't know. Good question what the effect is, but it is typical for many of the tiger moth caterpillars to spend the winter almost fully grown. And so they hibernate over the winter. When the spring comes around, they wander around, they have just a little bit more to eat, and then they make the transformation. They spin the cocoon, they weave their itchy hairs into the cocoon so they're protected while they're a pupa, and then they pupate, and then they turn into the moth later on. So they're kind of fun. Not always easy to identify, but fun to find. And then here's another insect that many of us associate with snow, but we almost never see them during that 3-month winter period, the stoneflies. Really, we get stoneflies, especially along rivers and creeks, later in the spring, you know, into late March and into April. And they'll often crawl around on the snow, but no matter how hard you look in February and so on, you're just going to have a hard time finding a stonefly. I don't know exactly why that is, but probably, and if anyone knows differently, please correct me. Probably what's happening is the stonefly larva. There's no pupa. They just go straight from a larva to an adult stonefly. The stonefly larva is probably sensitive to the length of the day. They don't just emerge because it's nice warm weather. They emerge because the day is long enough that they know it's springtime. So that's why you're not going to get a lot of these stoneflies emerging just because it's a nice day in February. But kind of interesting insects with a very typical long body shape, and it's kind of hard to see, but they typically have two little feelers out the end of the abdomen, cerci we call them. And you know, on snow, there's you never know what you're going to find. Any insect that basically hibernates is potentially going to show up on snow someday. This was a fun little critter, a loxoneid fly that I caught down by the Valley Zoo on snow, and it took me a long time to figure out what it was. I did get a genus name for it, but you know what? I can't see my notes underneath the slide here. I doubt there's anyone who really is interested in what the genus is of this fly, but if you are, let me know and I'll tell you. Okay, so then let's go from the on snow outdoors to the insects that are active outdoors but in water, the aquatic insects. And those can be in open water, you know, at springs or openings along rivers because of, you know, either natural or because of human activities, or under the ice. And a lot of our reports come from ice anglers who find, you know, something swims up the ice hole and they go, what's that? And send us a picture. So here's one that's an absolute regular in the big rivers, water boatman, one particular species of water boatman. And you know, every winter I try to get down to there's a particular storm sewer outlet where I can look down into the open water, and if I wait long enough with my binoculars, I'll see a water boatman, and then I'll check it off on the list. They're kind of beautiful things. I'm really fascinated by them. I'm tempted to just keep talking about water boatmen, but I'll click the slide instead. The one that really surprises people, especially the you know, the ice fishing crowd, is are the giant diving beetles. And I'm sure that many of you have seen these. This is a particularly big giant diving beetle. They can reach almost 4 centimeters in length. And this one swam up a hole in Nakaman Lake, which is not a particularly good lake for fishing, but it is a great lake for beetles. Amazingly, trout especially love eating these things, and I've talked to anglers who have caught large rainbow trout through the ice, and when they you know, fillet the trout to cook it, they open the stomach to see what it's eating, and in some cases live giant diving beetles are still present in the stomach. They eat these diving beetles. The diving beetles produce an obnoxious chemical, a toxin, a neurotoxin, and it's amazing that the fish aren't affected by that, or maybe they are. Maybe being a fish eating diving beetles under the ice is even harder than you would imagine. Here's a stonefly larva. I guess I should have put it with the adult stonefly, but you see the 2 feelers off the end of the abdomen. Kind of a cute little thing. It's very rusty in color because this one came from one of the springs that in Edmonton. There are quite a few springs that come out of the side of the riverbank, and they go through the Cretaceous bedrock, and there's a lot of iron in the ironstone there. So you get these orangish waters and orange larvae as a result. Cute little thing. With gills, it breathes with gills that are between the bases of the legs. And it's kind of hard to tell what's gill and what's just fuzz here, but that's how they breathe. And another spring near town of Stettler, or maybe Stettler's a city, pardon me, city of Stettler. I found this one not too long ago in a patch of open water. It's the larva of a remarkable damselfly, because the adult is red, but the larvae do very well in that spring over winter as well. They're you know, how do you tell one damselfly larva from another? Well, this one has big angular projections at the back of the head and very short gills compared to many other damselfly larvae. And there's a mayfly larva, just to round things out. And in this case, it has three appendages coming off the back end of the body, and the gills are along the sides of the abdomen. And of course, there are so many different species of mayflies. Fly fishers will tell you that you know, they love to identify the mayflies and imitate them when they're fishing, but they're interesting in their own right as well. And what about, okay, so now I've talked about outdoor bugs on land, in the water. We've also got this great array of things that show up indoors, in houses and other buildings, and some of them are quite mysterious. Here's one called Dirypteryx. It's a book louse, and I don't know. I don't think most people even know what a book louse is. But book lice, they're originally called book lice because the species that live in houses would feed in books, old books, the bindings of the books made with hide glue, you know, made from horse hide and so on. And there was enough nutrition in that glue that the book lice could build up populations in those situations. tiny little thing. These are probably the most common household pests, and we expected a lot of pests. The domestic beetle family, carpet beetles, larder beetles, feeding mostly on anything of animal origin. So that includes, wool and other animal fibers, but also little, things like spilled dog food and so on, like not everybody's dog gets every last crumb. And they are super common. There's no shame in having a house without these beetles in them. In fact, I'd be nervous if a house didn't have them. It's a sign that your house is able to support life. These are the most common, and to what extent are they pests? Most people just don't like them. They're not doing a huge amount of damage. Here's one that came out of a salad. Now that's a beetle that definitely did not complete its life cycle in winter in Edmonton. It's an asparagus beetle, but we do get quite a few records of things that come with food. So check your groceries. That's a good source of potential interesting records. And this is there's a couple of different species of beetles called asparagus beetles, but this is one of them. Very distinctive, actually kind of a pretty beetle, but quite small. And by the way, I'm using a lot of pictures here. The nice pictures are mine, right? But there's a lot of pictures that are, the photographs that were submitted to the project. So they're taken with all sorts of different cameras and different, phones, and some of these go back quite a few years. So it's especially fun trying to identify some of the stranger photographic efforts as well. Not to be hard on this picture, it's perfectly identifiable. It's a good picture. Okay, now this one is a mounted specimen, but that's because it was discovered in winter by a specialist in the what we call the micro moths, the really small moths. Our friend Greg Pohl, and he identified as a type of mumphid, and there are quite a few of these small moths that can be pests. Not just the clothes moth. Clothes moths are really quite uncommon in our part of the world, but there are moths that live in what we call stored products. Bird seeds. Sometimes other sorts of plant-based stored products. So here's this little mumphid. And Greg identified that expertly. Here's a thing that took quite a bit of time to figure out, but the experts thought it was an almond moth in a subfamily called the Phycitinae. It's quite a pretty little thing. I think, for many people who've participated here, the real fun is that you get subjects for macro photography in the middle of winter. You don't have to wait for so-called bug season. I do a lot of my photography in, a so-called studio. And when I say studio, I mean a small white bowl that I illuminate from different directions and try to get a nice featureless white background. So that's how this almond moth was photographed. Here's a many plume moth. Now, most of the time you see these things with the wings spread out a little bit more, and you realize that the wings are made up of plumes. Each wing looks like 6 little feathers. They're really quite neat things. Very common hibernators in buildings. I think this one was sent in by years and years ago by Bob Gaylord, who was a very prominent member of the Edmonton Nature Club and the clubs that preceded it. So that's a cool moth. The ash leaf cone roller moth, with a very distinctive sort of resting pose and body shape. kind of a pretty little thing. If you have ash trees in your yard, you know that sometimes that you find the leaves all sort of rolled up with a little caterpillar inside. That's the caterpillar of the ash leaf cone roller. And sometimes, you know, these little sort of sand and dust based cases that you find on the like garage doors and some walls on the outside of your house. There's a little caterpillar inside there, and that caterpillar does survive the winter in its little case. So there's a bagworm caterpillar case. Now, I live in Edmonton and we don't see these very often, but as soon as you get, you know, not too far south of here, people report large numbers of these narrow-banded picture-winged flies. As flies go, they're pretty darn snappy looking. I really like them. Ceroxes latisculus. And you know, basically what happens is they get into the building because they're looking for a place to hibernate. And they don't necessarily want to be active during the winter, so to speak. I don't know if flies have wants or not, but you know, the warm conditions inside the house fool them into remaining active instead of just going into a nice quiet hibernation. Here's a more common winter hibernating fly in my part of the world, the cluster fly. And you see those very fine sort of frizzy hairs on the body of that fly here behind the head on the top of the thorax. That's a good way to recognize cluster flies, plus the way the wing veins are arranged. I'm at the University of Alberta right now in our wildlife teaching room, and this is just prime winter habitat for cluster flies. We're always catching cluster flies. You know, I keep a net for the purpose of cluster flies. I used to put them under the door in my neighbor's office down the hall, but I don't know, he got mad at me for that. Here's a crane fly. Earlier on, I showed you a wingless crane fly. Here's a regular looking crane fly of the sort that you see in the summertime, but it showed up in our friend Laura's place a few years back, and she took a perfectly nice photograph of that. When I'm telling you the names of these things, oftentimes we don't know the species name. There are so many bugs. I mean, I'm just going to remind you of that. You know, we've got between 300 and 400 species of birds that have ever been recorded in Alberta. The number of species of insects, spiders, other arthropods is, who knows? Nobody has a believable total, but it's somewhere probably between 20 and 30,000. So, and crane flies are a big family. So I'm not embarrassed that I don't know the species of crane fly, but I would like to know it if I had the time to. Oh, and here's a scuttle. Now, this is a picture from just the other day. This is kind of a potentially embarrassing story, and hopefully you won't think less of me. So, you know, you start counting winter bugs, and you get into strange situations. I was using a public washroom the other day, and I was using the urinal, and I noticed as I was doing so a little black dot sort of running very erratically in the urinal, and I thought, oh, I know what that is. That's a scuttlefly. They have a particular way of running, and I thought, oh man, do I just leave it, or do I contribute to the project? So, and I always carry a vial with me. I won't show you, but you'll believe me. I had a vial, so I waited until the one other guy in the washroom left, and then I started sort of sneaking up on this thing. And luckily it left the urinal and went onto the wall. So then I felt, I don't know, a little less weird catching it. Is that just me? I did catch it, but you can see I kind of pinched its abdomen. It was unfortunate. I killed that little guy, but I photographed it for science, put it on iNaturalist, and someone else had agreed with my identification that it's a Megacelia. Interestingly, these things, they feed the larvae feed on dead insects. We always get reports from the bug room at the Royal Alberta Museum of this exact species of scuttlefly in the winters, because there's always something that some dead bug that evades detection for a while. I was buying my lunch today. It really enhances your life to know these things. Buying my lunch at a fast food place. And while I'm paying, I see the same movement on the counter in front of me. And I thought, oh, that's another scuttlefly. Maybe I can get a better picture. But I kind of missed that one and it flew away. And I had to wait until the person behind the counter was distracted doing something else before I made my move. You got to be subtle. But it's fun. It is fun. Restaurants, grocery stores, good hunting grounds. This paper wasp, this is a queen paper wasp. It showed up in wintertime in Medicine Hat. And a lot of our social wasps, like the paper wasp, the yellow jackets, the hornets, the queens spend the winter, then they start the new colony. They've already mated, they've got the sperm stored away. They start the new colonies in the spring. So that was a cool one. Here's a ground beetle. Where did I find the ground beetle? Running across the floor in the dealership at Freedom Ford in Edmonton. You just never know where you're suddenly going to find something interesting. And yeah, we're able to identify this as just species of Amara avida. Here's an Eleodes darkling beetle. Now that's a species that's common down in the grassland. So this is another Medicine Hat record. This one was in the basement in my mother-in-law's house, and we kept this one as a pet for quite some time. They do very well on dry dog food. They're very much desert creatures, so they don't need an awful lot of moisture. Just kept one corner of its sandy little tank moist and otherwise fed it dry dog food. Beautiful thing, and quite big, nice big beetle. Friendly, beautiful. Gave one to my niece years ago. She called it Mr. Bug. I think it lived 3 years. 3 years. You could really develop a relationship with a beetle over 3 years. Many people send in photographs of either the adult or the larva of the scarlet malachite beetle, a little predatory beetle that is remarkably common in houses. This is a European beetle that was introduced here. They're not doing anything harmful in your house, but they can become quite common, and they're very obviously stunning looking little things. They're not big, they're maybe 5-6 millimeters, but still attractive little things. I guess the larva is maybe as long as a centimeter. Camel cricket. Now I always get excited when I find a camel cricket. They're also sometimes called cave crickets. It's a wingless sort of cricket that for them, a basement is kind of like an extremely dry cave. And if you have any sources of moisture in your basement, it's even better. Desiccation is the usual big enemy of bugs indoors. Lots of spiders. The house spider is our most common indoor spider, also called the barn funnel weaver, with sort of striping on the legs and a distinctive banded pattern on the abdomen. But once you get into this and you start talking to spider experts, this is not an adult, by the way. This one's partly grown. You realize, and there's another barn funnel weaver showing how they don't all look exactly the same. This one made its little funnel web behind a bookshelf in our basement. And I just thought, oh, this is so nice. I'm just going to leave it. And it I don't know what it found to eat, but apparently there were enough other winter bugs to keep it going the whole winter. Here's another one. You'd think this was another one, but the spider expert said, no, that's another genus. That's an Agelenopsis funnel weaver, with a slightly different pattern and longer spinnerets. The organs that produce the silk are longer on this one. We get a lot of these boreal cobweb spiders. Here's a male with especially big palps, those boxing glove devices. The females are very rounded. I'm sorry, I don't have a good picture of a female, but a lot of people think they're black widows at first, but they don't have the red mark underneath. They're smaller and more brown. Here's a closely related thing. And the spiders, they just go on and on and on. I don't know. I'm not even sure. We don't have a full composite list of the number of species that have been reported. I've got a couple of very capable students who want to work on a composite list, and they're going to hopefully take that on in the next school year cycle. Here's another crab spider, very handsome crab spider with a distinctive black mark on the top of the abdomen. Thanatus, got a good name too. Sergiolus ground spiders, very very neatly marked and extremely fast, super fast. A lot of these things, it's not easy getting them in your vial so that you can get them somewhere to take a picture. But and I think we had at least one record of the Sergiolus this winter as well. Nice things. Jumping, everybody likes jumping spiders. Here's a Psittacus. This was reported from Medicine Hat. We've never seen them as far north as Edmonton, where I live. Centipedes, not spiders, but they're still arthropods, and therefore they're still winter bugs. The usual centipede in houses is this European Lithobius, and they don't live they usually come in, from the outdoors where they're active under the snow. They come up along the foundation and they find some opening, and they dry out very quickly in basements. So again, desiccation is the thing that is the big enemy for many of these, but they're quite fun. I saw one in my basement the other day, tried to catch it. It got under a bed and I didn't want to move the whole bed. So I'll just use this picture instead. Here's a millipede that was reported. Now, a lot of the winter bugs are not just in the house because it's a house, but many of them are associated with plants. So this millipede was in a potted plant. We get all these fungus gnats and dark-winged fungus gnats that are also the larvae are going to be in the soil in your potted plants. They're not hurting your plants. They're just there because it's a nice, rich organic environment. So we get a lot of reports of various fungus gnats. There's another jumping spider. This series of photos, this is a long time ago, probably close to the beginning of the project. This was at the Matart Conservancy, which is a public greenhouse with tropical and arid country plants. So that's a good place to look for winter bugs too. And here's another species of beautiful jumping spider from the Matart. I don't think either of these occurs in the wild in Alberta, so they come in with the plants and they do all right for a while, sometimes building up populations in greenhouses. There's also the potential of finding winter bugs that are associated not just with plants, but with aquaria. And most aquaria with tropical fish, the fish are going to catch all the bugs and eat them. Oh, look at that. The name is Sideways. I wonder how that happened. Crazy. Anyway, this is a dive. I showed you the giant diving beetle, which is huge. This diving beetle quite literally could rest on the head of a pin, and you wouldn't, that's about how big it is, like less than 2 millimeters. Tiny little diving beetle that showed. I have an aquarium where I keep water boatmen, and apparently I caught a few other things by mistake. So I was happy to identify this little diving beetle in my aquarium the other day. This nice little midge emerged from my aquarium. I found it flying around the house. At least I can't imagine where else it came from, because the larvae are aquatic. They live in aquatic situations. Beautiful little thing. It had been flying around the house long enough that the ends of its wings had worn off. But look at how pretty it is. I mean, those antennae are so gorgeous. The antenna, by the way, part of the function of the antenna, as I understand it, is they're kind of like a tuning fork. They allow the male, this is the male, to hear the wing beat frequency of the females, and that's how they find the females. So unfortunately, this one lived its very short life without ever hearing that magic sound. But it was neat to see it in the house. Okay, so just a little bit of a summary here. So far, what have we learned? Now, I did mention that this is a very informal project. Well, the first message is many species, and the number of species that we are finding on the winter bug count does not seem to be slowing down. We haven't actually produced graphs or summaries yet, but we've realized that just about any insect that is possible to find that doesn't spend the winter as an egg, it'll show up eventually. We've had just about anything, including tiger swallowtails, the great big yellow and black butterflies that were on the cover of Nature Alberta. Someone had a tiger swallowtail pop out of its pupa in their garage a couple of years ago in January. So there you go. The second sort of interim conclusion is we're not seeing what we expected. We were expecting all the classic snow bugs. We're expecting a lot of pests. No, we're seeing way more spiders and just a mishmash of other species. So that's kind of interesting. It tells us something about what's going on. Then from the human perspective, I think it's really important to acknowledge that this is an enjoyable activity. I mean, look, we have an actual audience for this talk. It's gotta be bringing human happiness in some sense. So that's great. It's for those of us who have an interest in bugs, entomological, arachnological, and so on. It's a great opportunity to practice our identification skills with groups that we don't know very well. In the summer, you can be a specialist. You can say, oh yeah, I do butterflies, or I do dragonflies, or I'm into beetles. But in the winter, you pretty well have to deal with whatever comes along. And we have had a couple of interesting new records, and that's been interesting. So the most surprising was actually back in 2013. We got a report from an apartment building in Barhead, Alberta, a colony of ants in some wood beside a water heater. A specimen came to me. I looked at it and I said, man, I don't know what this is. I gave it to my friend James Glazier, who is an ant specialist, and he said, oh, that's Hypoponera. That's like not just a new ant for Alberta, but a new subfamily of ants for Alberta. Before this thing showed up, we had no idea that this entire group, and these are mostly tropical ants. So I guess living, if you get inside the right piece of wood beside the right water heater, in Barhead, it feels kind of tropical. Then another colony showed up in the wood in the center of the pond insect display at the Royal Alberta Museum of the same ant species. So we have no idea how widespread this thing is, but that was the first detection of this ant in Alberta, was through the winter bug count. So that's cool. That's kind of what you want. You want all these eyes looking every direction and see what happens. We've been talking about the iNaturalist winter bug count project, and here's the page for it. Basically what happens, if you haven't done iNaturalist, it's pretty darn easy. You sign up, and then every record has to come with a photograph, which is really good, because without that, I would get lots and lots of, I have 1,500 emails about winter bug records, by the way, which I don't know. I hope that sounds like a lot. To me, it's a lot, and then we have all these other things. but you get all these people saying, oh, well, I found this bug and it's kind of small and it's really brown and it was, on a pillow. What is it? I gotta have a picture. So that's the great thing about the iNaturalist project, is it has a picture. And I think we have just a few minutes, Steph. Is that okay? I just want to take us to that page and just show you a couple of the reports that have come in so far this winter. There's that. That's one of the false black widows. I was talking about those. There's another one of those centipedes, same type that I showed you before. And look at this. This is fantastic. That is that's the first time anyone has reported a they're called different things. Ice crawlers, snow bugs, the grilloblattids. This is an order of insects that was discovered in Alberta. I think it was 1914 or something like this. Edmund Walker in Banff. He said, what on earth is this thing crawling around on the snow? It looks a little bit like a grasshopper, a cricket, kind of like a walking stick, kind of like a praying mantis. So he gave it its own order name, and it's a separate group of insects. These things they're long-lived, they're rare. That's just a fantastic record, and it's from look. Well, there's Canmore there, so it looks like it's somewhere in the Kananaskis Valley. Just so happy to see that. What else is going on? This says snow fly, so that's that wingless crane fly again, and many of us, are going through the other good thing about iNaturalist is if you have identifications to offer, you can contribute to the identification. There's a plume moth. I mentioned these crazy moths with the wings that look like they're made from 6 feathers each. Remarkable, very distinctive. Here's something that is absolutely bamboozling me. It's reported from Saskatchewan, near a place called what? Oh boy, I shouldn't have done that. Anyway, it's from Saskatchewan, and it's obviously some kind of immature plant hopper, but it looks like something from like the tropics to me. I have no idea. Some of these are so wonderfully challenging, and I won't go through them all, of course, but look at all this. Look at all this fun. And some of the photography is really good. Like there's a nice picture of a firebrat, which is a relative of silverfish, kind of a household critter. There's another one of the plume moth. There's a little fruit fly. There's a box elder bug, which most people call maple bugs here. Everybody gets, the occasional ladybug. We've got wood lice. There's my urinal fly. I'm pretty proud to see it there. Yeah, it's really. Oh, and here, look at that. There's a little aquatic crustacean. Glad to see that. There's a really nice picture of a box elder bug. Some sort of evidence. There's a lot of bug evidence here too. Maybe there's a bug there still. Maybe it's just the empty gall. Here's an incredibly challenging photo. I've tried to figure out what this, but it's just the worst possible angle to photograph a moth from. But that's cool. There's something interesting there. I love this picture of a bristletail. That is first-rate macro photography. This brown satyr moth, a hibernator, and it goes on and on and on. Isn't this fun? I hope you'll contribute. There's a zebra jumping spider. Oh, and a field cricket. There's the female false widow. Another centipede. Nice little ladybug with somebody's finger. Brown lacewing. You can see, and look at this. Here's even. I love it when birders give us pictures of the prey. And we were not only able to identify this thing as a dragonfly nymph, but there was an initial identification of stonefly, and then somebody said, "No, you know what? That's a dragonfly," and someone else goes, "Yeah, okay, that's cool. I agree. It's nice. It's kind of congenial, and then I agreed with this Aeschynidae family for the larva. Anyway, you get the idea. I'm going to stop sharing there, and I know I'm kind of running on here, but it looks like there's lots of things going on the chat, but I'd also be just happy to answer any questions if we've got time. And thank you for your attention. And I hope you'll participate.
Thanks so much, John. I'm just going to end the recording now, and then we'll answer some more questions. Thanks. Oh, wait. Let's see. Don't want to end the meeting, just end the recording.
Yeah.